last night he directed that we begin a deliberate withdrawal of U.S. forces from the northern part of Syria.
Now, how many people are we talking about? How quickly are they going to move out?
We're talking less than 1,000. I can't give you a timeline because it changes hourly. We want to make sure that we do so in a very safe, deliberate manner, that we deconflict things as we go with those folks on the ground in the immediate area.
But I'm not quite sure I understand. So the Turks and their militias are committing atrocities against the Kurds, who are our allies. The Kurds are asking us for help, but we're going to pull out and allow the Kurds to go to the Russians and the Syrians? That doesn't seem to make much sense.
Well, look, the United States, first of all, doesn't have the forces on hand to stop an invasion of Turkey that is 15,000 strong, if you will, preceded by airstrikes and artillery and mechanized forces. Got to keep in mind, too, that, look, we didn't sign up to fight Turkey, a long-standing NATO ally, on behalf of the SDF. Again, this is a terrible situation. That's why in the little over 2 months that I've been on the job, this has probably been the #1 issue that I've dealt with week after week with our Turkish counterparts. We've done everything we can to dissuade them from doing this. We thought we were making very good progress on the so-called safety zone in northern Syria, a way to keep the forces separated and to ensure we can keep both these good partners at odds ends. But as you know, Chris, this conflict has its roots that goes back 200 years. And in fact, in the last few years, since we began this relationship with the Kurds to take on ISIS, the Turks protested it from the beginning. This is now their third incursion into Syria in the last few years to do this.
But you emphasized on Friday that we stand by our Kurdish allies who fought with us, died. 11,000 of them died in the fight against ISIS. Here you are, sir, on Friday.
We have not abandoned the Kurds. Let me be clear about that. We have not abandoned them. Nobody green-lighted this operation by Turkey. Just the opposite. We pushed back very hard at all levels for the Turks not to commence this operation.
But, Secretary Esper, the U.S. has 50 special operations forces along the border, acting as a tripwire, if you will, to keep the Turks from coming across the border. We were the protection for the Kurds. After President Trump talked to President Erdogan last Sunday, President Trump decided to pull those troops out, and the Turks invaded. Isn't that the definition of abandoning the Kurds?
Yeah, I think you get the sequencing in the reverse order. The first thing that we understood, I've understood from my counterpart, Secretary Pompeo, from his, and certainly from President Erdogan, is they were fully committed to doing this regardless of what we did. We thought it was prudent. It was my recommendation. I know the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff agreed as well. We should not put U.S. forces in between a Turkish advance. We're talking less than 50, more like 24. There is no way they could stop 15,000 Turks from proceeding south.
But you had talked to your counterpart, the Turkish defense minister, several days before the presidential phone call, and you had said to him, let's make the safety zone work, where the Turks and the U.S. work together to keep this border and keep the Turks on one side of the border and the Kurds on the other side of the border. Then the president has his phone call with President Erdogan, and you say, well, there's nothing we could do. One, did Erdogan say, I'm going to come in anyway? Yes or no?
It was clear to me that President Erdogan was committed to coming in. He informed us that he was coming in. He didn't ask permission. It was clear to me that he was coming in.
But do you think that with 50 U.S. troops on the border acting as a tripwire and with U.S. complete air superiority over the border, do you really believe that President Erdogan and the Turks were going to just come through the border, perhaps create a conflict with the United States if we had stood firm?
Well, I think it's how you define standing firm. First of all, as I said, 50 service members are not going to stop a Turkish advance. And I'm not one to let me finish. To classify them as a tripwire and sacrifice them, if you will,
you only sacrifice them if Turkey goes ahead, sir. If Turkey says, we're not going to take on the U.S., we're not going to take on U.S. fighters overhead, maybe we would have stopped them.
I believe so. I think they were fully committed. That was what I took from my conversations with my counterpart. The Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Staff took from his, Secretary Pompeo from his. Look, the fact is also, Chris, we are not going to go to war, another war in the Middle East, against a Turkey, which is a long-standing NATO ally that has fought alongside us from Korea all the way through Afghanistan. That's not what we signed up for.
Well, do they seem like much of an ally now, Turkey?
No, I think Turkey, the arc of their behavior over the past several years has been terrible. I mean, they are spinning out of the Western orbit, if you will. We see them purchasing Russian arms, cuddling up to President Putin. We see them doing all these things that, frankly, concern us with regard to the direction they are heading.
But you say it concerns us. The reaction is that the president is going to pull all of our troops out of that region, and although he has talked about sanctions and authorized Secretary Mnuchin to impose sanctions, there's been no action.
Well, we'll see what happens. You know, like I said, all these developments have happened in the last 24, actually more like the last 14 hours, if you will. The National Security Team will be talking today about us. We still have been holding out hope that we could get to Erdogan and tell him to stop what he's doing, return to the border, and let's work on the safety zone, the mechanism. Those talks are still, by the way, underway right now. We want to get to that point and settle this situation down, stabilize it, so we can get back on the right path.
And meanwhile, what do you say to the head of the SDF, our allies, the people who fought and died to help us beat ISIS? Mazloum Kobani Abdi, the head of the Kurdish army, said today, "You are leaving us to be slaughtered." What do you say to him, sir?
I would say what we've been saying, because we stay in contact with him. We are doing everything we can to get the Turks to stop this egregious behavior, get them to go back across the line and stop. And that's our message to them at this point in time.
President Trump says that he is just keeping a campaign promise. Here he is.
We want to bring our troops back home. And I got elected on that. If you go back and look at our speeches, I would say we want to bring our troops back home from these endless wars.
But while we are in the process of pulling troops at least back in Syria, maybe not out of Syria, although the president has talked about that, you just announced on Friday the president is going to send another 1,800 troops into Saudi Arabia. So are we trying to get out of the Middle East? Are we trying to get out of endless wars or not?
Well, we do have the aspiration to relocate our forces, to move back in certain regions of the world so that we can reposition them to deal with the real strategic challenges we face. That is number one, China, and number two, Russia. In this case with Iran, we know that their malign behavior over the last 40 years continues to create instability throughout the entire Middle East, to include northern Syria. So in that regard, we want to make sure we have sufficient forces on the ground, first to help defend our partners, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and secondly, to deter further Iranian provocative behavior that could lead to a conflict. We are not looking to a conflict in the Middle East and not with Iran. But as I said to them, they should not mistake our restraint for weakness. If they do, and do something that would strike our interests or our allies, we will respond.
I got 2 minutes left. I want to ask you two questions about, I'm sure, a subject you're dying to talk about, which is impeachment. House Democrats have subpoenaed you personally, that you as the Secretary of Defense turn over all documents related to decisions being made about authorization and then the decision to withhold military aid to Ukraine. Will you comply by the deadline for the House subpoena, which is this Tuesday, 2 days from today?
We will do everything we can to respond to their inquiry, Chris. My general counsel a week or two ago sent out a note, as we often do in these situations, to the key members in the Pentagon to say retain your documents and institute other controls. So, again, we will respond as we can.
You say we respond as we can. You're not making a firm commitment you will meet the deadline of Tuesday.
Well, I don't know. I don't know the status of what that document preparation is. I don't know what restrictions we may have internally with regard to releasing them. The White House has a say on the release of documents as well. There are a number of things that play into this.
Finally, last May, the president's phone call with Zelensky was in July, but last May, 2 months before, the Undersecretary of Defense certified to Congress that Ukraine had made major efforts in fighting corruption and certified to Congress that the Pentagon was in fact going to release all military aid that had been approved by Congress to the Ukrainians. Did President Trump ever explain to you why he had decided to go against the Pentagon's decision and to hold up the aid?
Chris, I have nothing to share with you on this. As you know, I came into office in